Welcome to the Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff podcast, where we have off-the-cuff and candid conversations about the big topics in the world. I'm your host, Sean Kneese, and we're diving into the topic that's both challenging and transformative, shadow work. And shadow work was first explored by psychologist Dr. Carl Jung in the early 20th century, and it's about exploring the parts of ourselves we often hide, suppress, or deny. So the parts we'd usually judge, usually based on things that cultures would consider taboo or that society wouldn't accept as much, or emotions that you feel you shouldn't have. I feel like a lot of modern spirituality actually is about looking away from the shadow, because it's always like, think positively, but I don't think that's human to always be positive, and it's not necessarily wrong to have a negative thought. Sometimes you have to understand those negative aspects to yourself, or why you feel anger certain times, or why you, if you just suppress it, then you're not going to be able to explore it. And on a societal level, I think that, the shadow is something, because I know there's some people that say, we should only look at the good things going on in the world. Well, that doesn't really help people who are suffering or facing any kind of injustice if we just look away from it and we don't understand it and just try to, even Martin Luther King, who was all about peace, he said, true peace is not merely the absence of tension, it's the presence of justice. So he believed in understanding why things are the way they are. For example, rioting, he always said, was the language of the unheard, heard, understanding why that happens. So not condoning it, but understanding the root of it and how do we address those issues. And then, how do we build a peaceful society from there? And so I think, on a societal level, that works. And actually, the original spiritual teachers, Jesus, he didn't look away from suffering. He was always, he turned towards the people who were suffering, and he helped heal them and get them to a better place. To me, it's the Christ within. Christ is kind of our Buddha nature in a way. And Buddha, he started off hidden away from all the wrongs of the world, disease and old age, but then his enlightenment happened because he became aware of suffering, because he became aware of sickness and old age. And then through facing that, then he was able to be enlightened and become the Buddha. So I think on a societal level and on a human level, we have to acknowledge all the parts that we want to look away from too, not just the good and what's comfortable. And we have to acknowledge our flaws and not always necessarily the dark side within us, but the parts that we repress. And today I have a guest joining me, Gabrielle Angel Lily. It's the second time on the Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff. She's a musician. That's the main thing of hers, but she also, you've dived deep into yourself spiritually and all that too. And I know you do child work, inner child work, which is similar kind of to the shadow in some ways, because a lot of the shadow relates to childhood experiences that shaped us early on. And for you, you help people explore their inner child and everything. But I'll let you introduce yourself further, and you can kind of give your thoughts on the topic and everything I said. So,
all right. Hi, and thank you, Sean, for having me back on. I was just reflecting on how last time we spoke on the podcast, we talked about meaning and what makes meaning of life. And I actually think there's a real relationship between shadow work, our shadows in general, or what's called the shadow, which is, just to put a definition on it, by my understanding, is the aspects of ourselves that are unconscious. So not necessarily dark, although usually we keep those aspects of ourselves that we don't approve of, so we consider them. Often they're related to the what's air quotes darker aspects of ourselves. I think part of the work of shadow work is coming to recognize that they're not really dark and that they're really all aspects of ourselves are valid. They come about for a reason. And when we can bring up and look at, from a more objective perspective with a little more distance, when we can look at those aspects of ourselves that we're repressing and that we'd rather not look at because we really, would rather not not have them, not be that way. But when we can look at them, we often can soften them. We often can see how they actually hold opportunities for us, not just the challenges. Usually in that typical way that life is,
Yeah.
our biggest challenges are also our biggest opportunities. So very often the biggest opportunity for healing and for self-discovery lies in shadow work, in my experience. And you mentioned inner child work, very closely related, and really just sort of a different shade of a very similar type of work, which is looking at aspects of ourselves that have maybe not had not been brought out into the light and given a voice. And, I deal with inner child work. I think it's important to recognize it doesn't mean giving that inner child the steering wheel, so to speak, of your
Yeah.
life all the time, but it means validating it to some, that appreciating, allowing it some space to be explored, to be expressed in a safe context.
Yeah. And I think a lot of our shadow is the things like that we recognize in others that make us uncomfortable. Usually that's an indication that that's our shadow.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
use that it's probably some of my clients' least favorite things that I say, and it's one of my least favorite pieces of the work. But you can get really quickly to where your work is by just reflecting on what you've been critical of other people about, what you catch your mind. If you have a mind like mine with an internal narrator, maybe if you don't, then your words, toward other people, what are you finding yourself critical of other people? And I think a lot of people maybe aren't ready to look at the fact that you, like I like to say, it takes one to know one. You can't actually recognize something in someone to criticize unless you sort of have an aspect of that in yourself. I believe. I acknowledge that there's, some people would disagree with me, and I think that's valid too. But in
Yeah.
my experience, working in my own healing journey and helping other people with their healing journey, it often comes down to these aspects of ourselves that we're like stuck on, and we're often, you see the clue in an outward projection of that feeling towards someone else. So you might, I think I shared with you previously that I
Yeah.
catch myself internally criticizing people for being dishonest, and when I really reflect on my own life, my own dishonesty is a huge component in my own life struggle, and my unwillingness to look at that. Like, as long as I'm just pointing a finger at other people and criticizing them for being dishonest, I'm not able to do that work. That when I turn it around and look at myself and go, okay, where am I being dishonest, and how can I be more of the kind of person I want to be by being less dishonest, and also be less judgmental of others for a thing that I myself, am doing. And in that softening, I get to be more loving to myself and to others, and hopefully become more honest, or whatever it is, the type of person that I want to become.
Yeah. I remember somebody told me once, like dishonest people will assume people are dishonest, and honest people will assume they're honest. But I mean, I think that could also be like if somebody's been hurt a lot of times, like trauma or like betrayed
Yeah,
a lot too. Sometimes, yeah,
there's a lot of nuances to things, and I don't think there's any one single fitting, explanation to all things, but I do think there are general truths, and I think one of those is that we tend to project our own shadows onto other people, and that if we, whenever you're ready to do that kind of work, and I've also shared with you, maybe you're not ready and you get dragged kicking and screaming due
yeah,
to a health circumstance or something like I did. But in that process, the opportunity is like literally right there in my body, in front of me all the time, of like, where is the work? Oh, it's where I'm criticizing other people.
yeah.
And
And I just thought of like a lot of times people who are like openly, outwardly like homophobic, they'll it'll come out at some point that they
they
had a
might
secret
discover
hate.
they have some nuanced feelings that,
Yeah,
that they don't want to,
yeah.
face. And
Especially if they come from a background that like shames that. then they want to
Exactly,
be like,
exactly.
no,
It's
I'm
a
not
very
that,
common story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think exactly. I came from a background that shamed lying. And if I reflect out, just to use that as one example, it's not the only one in my life, but since, I've talked about it before, and I think it's a good one. I'm having trouble
Oh,
with
it
my
froze again.
video again. So coming back from some technical difficulties, maybe our shadow selves were self-sabotaging ourselves. No, I'm just kidding. But I was talking about how we project our own self loathing onto other people often by how we disapprove. In my case, I was using as an example that I tend to think of criticize people's dishonesty when actually, if I'm honest with myself, it's because I have a lot of dishonesty that I'm not looking at in my own life. And the good part of that is that if I bring that into the light, I can become more honest. I can lessen my judgment of myself and others with regard, I can recognize that we all have different reasons that we might be dishonest. It's not just, being a POS. Maybe there's other reasons like childhood traumas and
Like parts
wanting
of
to
your
keep.
stuff that what wasn't accepted. Like if you were raised a certain way and there were things you did that you hid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You brought up sexuality. I think that's a huge one for so many people. And there's so much shame often, not just about our sexual choices, but just sexuality in general can be a huge source of shame for people. And so then you might find yourself projecting onto other people a judgment, either subtly or not so subtly, about other people's sexuality when it really doesn't affect you, other than there's a piece of you maybe that's looking for
Like you don't want to be seen as
acceptance.
that, and especially
Yeah,
if you're raised that that's wrong, or that in some religious cases that it's a choice to be that way. That's like something you don't want to choose. So you're
yeah.
judging other people.
When and like to elaborate on that more a little bit, it doesn't mean like if a person, say, to use the example of a person is very homophobic, and then maybe if they looked deeper underneath and into that shadow aspect of themselves, they might see that they had some uh, impulses when they were younger that were toward the same sex, and it may or like it might not mean anything that they're
Yeah, it's just
that
something
they
they're
need to
afraid of
act
doing. It
on,
could be something
but
they're afraid.
exactly they or like it doesn't mean that they are homosexual necessarily, but it might mean that they have a deep sense of shame over something that happened either to them or that they were involved in, and by bringing that into the light, they might be able to forgive themselves for it, or see it in the context of them being a child or in a different situation in life, and then through that they might be able to be less judgmental of other people for
And
their
I was
own
just thinking, like in high school,
choices.
I knew some people that like they became bullies because they were bullied. So like they,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's another very common. I mean, it's time and time again when you look at somebody's behavior that seems like incongruent with the way society wants to be or with the way they want to be in their own lives. I think so often it's this self-sabotaging quality that a person will have where it's like, I don't know why I get angry and blow up, or I don't know why I keep doing this thing. Well, it's often because there's this shadow
or
aspect
it could be
as
envy. It could be envy too, like, and I guess that's part of the shadow.
yeah,
You could be mad at something for something you envy in them or whatever.
it's very much part of the
Yeah,
shadow. And yeah, that is actually one of the big ones, not only the lying aspect, but envy is another huge one. And I think there's probably, a handful, a basket, 5 or 10 major things that the majority of humans end up working on: envy, shame, feeling like we're not enough. Um, on, go ahead. I was going to add honesty because that's one that I'm working on, but I think there, you know, in different religions, like you could look at it like the seven sins, I think it's called, but all throughout human history, we've come to conclusions of like, oh, these are the set of things that humans really struggle with, and they tend
yeah.
to be fairly
Well, and
common.
most of the seven sins only don't really. hurt anyone, aren't necessarily evil. It's just stuff if you indulge in it too much, it could be bad. Or
Yeah, I like the definition of a sin being missing the mark. So if you're looking at creating your life, the life that you desire, a life that you're happy and fulfilled with, then a sin would be that self-sabotaging aspect that takes you out of alignment so that you're not hitting the mark of who you want to be, and instead, you're off the mark. And I think that very much is tied into Carl Jung's work with the shadow aspect of ourselves. I think a lot of times people think of the shadow as the negative aspect, and the conversation we're having now, it would lean into that definition, but I think it's important to distinguish. It's really not about negative or positive. It's about unconscious. And like you mentioned, envy, I think that's a great example. It could be an unconscious desire, something you really want in life that you're not facing, that you're not acknowledging. And so every time you see somebody that is, doing that, like for me, I want to be an artist that's more recognized. So I do catch myself sometimes being envious of other artists and their success. And if I just can acknowledge that and bring it in the light, it can be fuel for me to be motivated to, direct myself. But if I suppress it and I keep it in that shadow self, then I might just project it onto someone and think, oh, they don't, I might just become nasty, basically, and an unpleasant person by, projecting that dissatisfaction and that sense of I'm not fulfilling my own desire and trying to project it onto someone else. I think you mentioned society as a whole at the beginning of this. I think that is the crux of the situation of, that causes wars, that causes big conflicts and problems at a societal level, is that
and it's usually
shadow
problems that
aspect.
we don't look at. That's like why when I hate it when people say, especially like in the new age community, like, oh, just shut the new, don't look at the bad things. It's like, who does that help? Like, if you're just
Yeah,
unaware,
it's
things.
tricky because, I come from a lot of that training, and I understand the
Yeah, but some people
idea
can't look
of,
away because they're directly affected by it
like,
too.
what we give our attention
Yeah.
to does grow. So I think that law of attraction stuff does have some, for me, there's some real validity in that, but I think it gets misinterpreted as just be positive. And this is where shadow work can be so beneficial, because there's a whole, just like an iceberg, there's your consciousness, the little bit on top that you're aware of, and then there's this huger amount of unconscious stuff, and that's where shadow work lives. There's just a lot more going on in your unconscious than there is in your conscious, and if you tap into that a little bit, you can start to understand what you actually want, what you don't want, those kind of things that can just lead to having a, back to that meaning piece that you and I talked about before. It can lead to a life of more meaning and fulfillment to do the shadow
Yeah,
work.
but I don't know. I guess I feel like you need to look at the dark things too, though, to kind of like be able to check. Because like there's some people that can't look away from dark things because it's like or something going on in the world because it's affecting them directly. So like if that person's being like, I feel like that person's happiness is important too. So like if
Yeah, I think,
I don't know.
I think an important distinction to make is about how we're looking at something. So there's a way to look at a problem, again, on this like superficial level, where we're just sucked into it, like watching an accident, and we're basically adding our energy and our attention to it. And then there's a different way to look at it, like the fly on the wall or the bird on the windowsill, or some kind of, a little more objective with more space. And when we can look at things without that judgmental
Yeah,
quality, with more space around it, with more acceptance, then I think that's where the growth lies.
yeah. But like I guess because I was thinking like somebody could be in the mindset. No, I'm not saying you like somebody else could take that the wrong way and be like, okay, I'm not even going to look at disabled people or people who have missing limbs or whatever because that's negative stuff. I don't want to look at that stuff. But then it's like those are human beings you're overlooking and you're
Yeah.
not
Well, and I
empathizing.
think if you start to really look, you start to find out that our judgments about, like, for example, I like having both my arms. So if you said, would you rather have two arms or one arm? I would agree that having losing an arm would be a negative. And yet I think people who only have one arm or no arms, or various disabilities, help us come to terms with the fact that that isn't where our value lies. Like we're still, every being has some aspect of value. And disability is such an interesting thing because I think until, as the saying goes, until it happens to you, you don't imagine it can happen to you. And yet, most human beings will either directly experience or have to care for or get to care for somebody who is experiencing a severe disability at some point in their life. And, that just means somebody who needs some help. And actually, human beings, we get that meaning from helping each other. So there's actually, I think, an underappreciated value in people who need help. And families, I have a cousin who has a lot of severe disabilities, and my uncle and my cousins who have cared for her have often remarked on what a life lesson that has been and how it has helped them become so much more compassionate and appreciative, not just compassionate like, oh, we have to deal with her shortcomings or her challenges, which there are many challenges to it, but really in that you get to appreciate that she has things to offer as well as, all human beings do. And I tend to think of all things on like a spectrum. So depending on the lens you're looking at things through, like if you're running a race, then maybe somebody with no legs is a little less valuable on that spectrum, in that context, unless they got like wheels and a motor, and then they become more valuable all of a sudden, so.
Yeah. Well, I guess I was thinking about like my friend. She's a disability rights activist. She lost both her legs because of lupus. She's been on the show a few times, but she like is a writer, and she wrote a poem that was why I'm no longer a person, about like how people overlook her because she
Mhm.
has a disability, or they'll talk to the person next to her, not her. Or they'll like it's rare that people just talk to her like a regular person, or a lot of people will just ignore her. And I think a lot of that is like people just because they don't want to be there themselves, so they kind of just they don't look at disabled people. That's why they get or people, that's why a lot of people throw their older relatives or parents into the nursing home. But to me, that's why I'm saying, like, I think that goes against spirituality. Because, like, even the Buddha, he became aware of suffering, and that's where his enlightenment come. He didn't just only look at the good. He looked at the bad and he integrated it into his, like, because that's a part of the life that he needed to acknowledge too.
Yeah, and I mean, I think as I have done that, I've seen, like, take aging, for example, which again seems bad, like losing a limb, only different would seem bad, but there is a decline of capacity, which isn't my favorite thing, but at the same time, I appreciate that. In my mind, it's like a passing of a torch. I do think aging seems to be necessary. Death seems to be necessary. I know that's a little bit on the table right now with AI and all kinds of new technology. I have friends who think, oh, one day we won't have to die and that will be a good thing. I tend to disagree. Like, I think there's a natural course. I mean, I'm all for less illness and less disease and less suffering, but I think that there's a beautiful aspect to aging and getting older and wearing out and passing that on to the next generation, just like there's a beautiful aspect to being a young baby, being young and naive. There's a balance that happens, and I don't think any part of it is wholly wrong and shouldn't be. And in doing shadow work, that's what's helped me, like, really come to appreciate those aspects, even what would be called the darker aspects of myself, um, have
Well,
a
that's
place,
where true happiness comes from, not from like repressing or not facing the things you don't want to face. And
Yeah,
I think that helps people be more compassionate too, because then they don't look away from things they want to look away.
yeah. And I don't know if I would use the word happiness necessarily, but fulfillment and,
Fulfillment, yeah.
just like a sense of richness of like being vibrantly alive, which is one of my great motivators. Like, so it's not always happy and it's not always even pleasant, but it is like fully engaged, fully aligned with the kind of person that I want to be. Yeah, for me, I'm kind of a messy, not kind of, very much a messy artist type. A lot of my life, when I'm fully aligned with who I want to be, there's a fair amount of messiness in that. But I imagine that that's not true at all for everyone. And I think that's part of it to me, is all of us accepting that, like, if we were all the same, we wouldn't even be here. If we were, it'd be terrible, So
Yeah.
like the amazing,
That's
wonderful
what makes
thing
it
about it
interesting, is that everybody's
is,
different.
yeah, is all these differences and all these nuances. And so coming to appreciate all of those differences and nuances is, for me, part of the richness,
Well, and being open to understanding the differences, because a lot of people aren't. They just want to put things they don't understand into a box, or people they don't understand into a box.
Yeah, I do think that to tie into that spiritual piece that you've mentioned, or the law of attraction kind of stuff, that there is validity to. I think it's more along the lines of what you resist persists, and it's the unconscious looking, like turning away from things, that actually gives it a lot of energy in a weird way, because you're like you're spending
Yeah,
a lot of
I guess I
energy to
like that
keep
stuff to a
something.
point. I just feel like it can be, with the wrong people, they perceive it in more of like a selfish way, or that anybody who's like disenfranchised, it's their fault. I just think, taking an extreme, it could be seen that way, but I think it could be used in a good way too. I mean, there's people who talk about it in ways I appreciate, and then there's others that like Mitch Horowitz is one, because he talks about like manifesting, but he also he talks about like being like giving back to others too, and he's not coming from like a selfish
Yeah.
place. Not that there's anything wrong with like doing some stuff for yourself, but like I think like taking the wrong way, it can kind of like validate a sociopath
Hmm.
if it's the wrong
Yeah.
type of person. Yeah.
Yeah, I think anything can get out of balance. I mean, that for me
Yeah.
has been one of the lessons of life for sure. It's like anything, I love ice cream, but if I just eat ice cream, ice
Yeah.
cream, ice cream all the time, eventually it makes me sick. So, for example, like anything can be taken to too much of an extreme, and conversely, I think everything has a right to exist. Anything that does exist, obviously, must have a right to exist because it does exist. So that's my philosophy anyway. I'm sure not everybody agrees with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were gonna add something, or?
No, I'm just reflecting in real time about all of that. I think it's a beautiful thing that we can disagree, and even people disagreeing with that aspect is part of the beautiful aspect of life to me. So I get around it that way. But I think even like the danger and what I'm saying there, and that attitude can be Pollyanna, as it's called, or like I think it's important that we all check each other, that we have conversations like you and I are having, and that we that people share different perspectives, because no single one of our perspectives is the whole piece. So um to tie it
Yeah,
into shadow work.
there's no one size fits all. Like, there's a little bit of truth in a lot of things. So
Yeah.
yeah.
The shadow work for me has been, I mean, while I've helped some people with it, and you and I have talked about how I think there's a societal piece to be looked at, but mostly it's been a very personal journey for me, and a lot of journaling, and really reflecting on my own judgments, my own envy, those places in my life where I can, um, by bringing that unconscious part into a more conscious light, then it just feels like it expands me. I don't know that there's a
Is it
like
like
an
just being able to recognize it all? You mean? Or?
Yeah, it helps me be less judgmental of others. It helps me be less judgmental of myself, probably, more like on some level it's all the same thing to me. There's like a reverberation there, but as in either direction, if I pull something out of myself from the unconscious and into the light, and realize, like, oh, I'm having this envious feeling, or I'm feeling, resentful, or betrayed is another big one. And then if I bring it into the light with that little bit of distance, I can see how it fits into a bigger picture of often it's an older, back to that inner child work. Often
Yeah.
it's a story that either somebody else told me or that I've been telling myself, that's rooted in some just lame, not true thing. There's so
Yeah.
many of our
And a
stories
lot
are
of
just not true.
generalizations like people make, like it's just from their own experiences, or their, like, a lot of it's not
Yeah,
true
or
in
we
cases.
get caught on little
Yeah,
cliches because they sound fun or something, I think sometimes, that really have no basis in truth, or, it's hard to say. Maybe there's a conspiracy sometimes to, indoctrinate people into a phrase. I'm sure some of that happens, but also I think sometimes, like, I like rhyming. Sometimes, it's been shown, like, I make a joke a lot of times, it's true because it rhymes. The human mind will naturally give more credence to something that sounds rhythmic or rhymes.
yeah.
And it,
And sometimes people are kind of like judge the opposite way. Um, I know how they talk about like how people will like uses this thing like people will positively perceive someone based on uh like if someone's better looking or this or that, but then like also sometimes it can go in the other direction. Someone will assume, oh, just because someone's good looking they must be superficial or they must be only looks, and that's not necessarily always true too. It's like unless you have a conversation with the person, they could have other, like, either way that's a person with
yeah,
complexities. So,
I think the fact is we all have all these unconscious biases. Some people
yeah,
do more active digging of digging up of them, but even, like, I don't think, like, I would put my nickel bet on that even the Buddha was still a fallible human being at
but
the
yeah,
end. Not, yeah, I
yeah,
could be
he
wrong,
had some
but
dated
like,
like views for his time and
yeah,
stuff
I mean,
too.
I
Like,
think
yeah,
this, in my exploration of wisdom and wise people, which has been extensive, I haven't found a wise person yet who would, a real wise person would freely, readily admit that they're fallible and that they don't, there's a lot they don't know. The more we learn, the more we don't know, in fact. I don't think I think of it like peeling an onion or layering an onion, depending on which direction you want to think of
yeah,
it. And so my shadow work has been, a lot of layers. That's why I like the spiral symbol. It's a lot of going around and feeling like I'm expanding a little bit more, maybe uncovering a little bit more.
yeah.
Um,
I
yeah.
remember it was the book, the how to think like Sherlock Holmes, was kind of about like questioning your first assumption about someone, or like a first judgment, like whether it's a positive or negative assumption about someone, to question it. Like that was a good book about kind of like critically thinking
Yeah,
about
the
like,
human brain is very fallible. So my book
yeah,
that I have behind me, The Shift, which I spent several years writing about emotions, and in that really tried to dive into the neurochemistry, the neurology, the biology of our emotions and our thinking, and once again sort of uprooted the same thing I've uprooted in most of my quests, which is that it's a deep rabbit hole, and that we don't, we're always learning. The more we learn, the more there is to know. But the one thing that has been pretty solidly established for a long time in every type of science that has looked is that the human brain is this predictive machine that's basing it on past experiences, and is just really, really fallible, like just lies, just lying. We're just lying to ourselves all the time. And that's fine because it helps us get around as long as we're checking that, against what's actually happening. But I think a lot of people have stopped that checking it, and they're just going like, and I say, by a lot of people, I'll put air quotes and include myself
yeah,
in that lot of people. Societally, we have this, maybe it's media, television. We have this great imagination, and I think it is a thing that makes humans special, different from a lot of other animals. But it also puts us in this state of lying to ourselves and each other a whole lot.
yeah. Well, and it could be used as a good tool. It's just like you have to control it, not let it control you. Because I think uh imagination could be good for setting intentions and not
Absolutely. I think it's the thing,
shaping the life you
it's
want.
our superpower. It's the thing that's
Yeah,
allowed us to build civilizations and allows us to, talk to each other on the internet. So many wonderful things. That predictive, imaginative brain.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm
And sometimes the way
passionate
you
about
think about someone or
keeping it
something, like,
alive.
that can change in the world, or the way you think about how others see you. Like that can, if it's a positive way, it can be used in a positive way
I
too.
think, yeah, it's important to I talk about that, keeping space around things a little bit, like to have some more perspective and recognize that your own narrative story is only a small fraction and probably very fallible. And so by sharing and by examining it, and shadow work is about. Like, it's a lot of journaling a lot of times. Like, there's a lot of great prompts out there of, why do I think that? Or
Yeah, or
let's
why do I react that way when
examine,
this happens?
yeah,
Or
examine really what's the first time I remember thinking that, or where does that come from? And really just kind of like a ball of tangled up string, untangling it a little bit and seeing a little more clearly what was really going on, which is almost always just people being people, human beings being humans. We're colorful and messy and fun,
yeah, yeah,
mostly.
and that also made me think of something else. Like like those who think well of others tend to think well themselves. Because like you were talking about the projection, like yeah,
Yeah, yeah, such an interesting thing how we, for me, like both that I'm the center of my own universe, and that also I project that out onto others in such a way where I'm constantly grappling with, wanting to negate or confirm my own sense of self-worth, worthiness based on how other people, react to me or interact with me. Um,
yeah,
yeah, sometimes I do better with it than others, but I can freely admit, like, I haven't mastered that completely yet. Although some days I feel like, oh yeah, I'm a master, but other days, if you open the dictionary to worst case scenario, there would be me. So
yeah. I think it's also I lost my thought,
it's all
but
right.
yeah, I'll cut to
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Because
go
what
ahead.
were we gonna say?
I was going to ask you if you have done any formal shadow work, if you've done any on your own or with somebody, either a friend or a therapist or that kind of thing.
Nothing formal, but I've definitely tried to recognize why I react certain ways or certain patterns, or like why was seeking validation in certain points, or um, why certain things made me angry or irritated me. Like I've gone into that like because I do a lot of introspection, but like no like official formal way of doing it. But
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I like formal ways of doing it. You can pay somebody to
yeah,
who's read a book to,
yeah,
to guide you through it. And I've had a few people pay me to help them with. I think having a coach, having a guide, having a therapist is
yeah,
definitely valuable, but isn't the only way to do it. And isn't, like people don't have to wait till they have that to do the work. Right.
yeah.
And there's
Well, I
so
think
many great.
even doing like this podcast, like the solo episodes where I talked about my own experiences and like certain my vulnerabilities and like weakness and like how I've learned. Because I was also going to add that that's part of being confident too. Is the confidence not just like recognizing your strengths and seeing yourself like, oh, I'm great on this. It's being okay with making a mistake or having flaws or having ways that you act and like where you don't always act right in situations or you don't, but like accepting that and being like, okay, that is something I do, but I have that I'm working on. Like that's the real confidence comes from recognizing that. And then just like the looking away from that is just like the other extreme. It's like the narcissism, and that's like narcissists get very defensive, like if they're criticized in any way because they have this like I'm the nicest person, I'm the greatest person, and then if anybody says no, you weren't nice in here, like a confident person or someone who actually is like uh, caring or empathetic, be like, okay, so what did I do? Like they'd be okay with seeing where
My dogs are going crazy there. Sorry about that.
yeah,
Yeah, you were saying confidence.
yeah, somebody who actually is confident or uh, empathetic would be able to hear that, like saying, okay, you were inconsiderate in this one point. They'd be I think the stronger thing to do is listen and be like, okay, how was I inconsiderate? Instead of just going to the defense. Well, I'm a very considerate person. I did this and that for you. I did this and that. Like that's not real confidence because what are you defending if you're confident? But I think that's the thing narcissists do too. Is like they'll quickly defend or shut down any criticism. It's like, how dare you insult me? But I think it's also like regular people who aren't narcissists, like this, when you get defensive because something somebody's telling you makes you look at yourself differently than what you saw. Like if you view yourself as a kind, caring person, and someone says, "No, you were very inconsiderate in this case," but like even if you don't feel that way, that's that person's experience. So it's worth listening to them and being like, "Okay, what did I do?"
Yeah. I think I would take it a little step further than that, even, and invite people to, like, it's, even if you do say, how dare you, or, you find yourself responding in a way that, that is just sort of doubling down maybe on a negative behavior. If you could give yourself enough permission to, like, in the privacy of your own journal or your own mind late at night or early in the morning, to just, like, with a little space around it, have a little curiosity of, like, and it has to do with that compassion of, like, a little grace, like
Yeah.
saying, okay, maybe it's okay to be an asshole sometimes. Maybe it's okay to get things wrong, to have been raised in a society that has lots of biases and racism and sexism and ageism and all these isms. Like, if we can give ourselves a break for it, it doesn't mean to say, like, oh yeah, it's fine. I'm happy being a racist or whatever. Like, but it means saying, I am human and I have all this conditioning and all this unconscious, like, again, to the iceberg analogy, like, there's 90% of my beliefs and my experiences and my memories aren't on a conscious level, but are affecting how my brain is perceiving whatever's going on. So I could
Yeah.
have
And there's
this
nothing wrong
anger
with it. It doesn't
reaction.
make you lesser. Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off. My bad.
No, but I think exactly. It doesn't mean, like, if you can get past that judgment part and into the part of going, like, of curiosity, being like, huh, I wonder why I'm so angry at that person.
Yeah.
For
And I was
me,
also thinking, like, there's nothing wrong. A lot of like, if somebody says you said something, like, if someone's of a certain background and then they tell you said something insensitive to people in my background, like this or that, and, like, maybe there's nothing wrong with, like, actually just, like, listening and being like, okay, what was there something, like, did I have a blind spot about something I said? It doesn't mean you're putting yourself down or, like, anything. It's just, like, acknowledging, okay, maybe some biases are sometimes deeply ingrained.
yeah.
You don't
And
always see them.
I have found that not only that, like, to listen and to ask, which can be very, like, it's not always easy, sometimes it's uncomfortable, difficult. And sometimes, in my experience, my brain might, if I ask you to elaborate and you elaborate, there's a good chance that initially that part of my brain that's judging and that's having a negative reaction to it might still be continuing during that little part. So why I use the word grace a lot with myself and some of my clients lately is, like, if we could just recognize that it might take a little time, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe next year, you're going to have a little epiphany of, like, oh, I realized how I was an asshole then, or how, like, I
Yeah.
realized suddenly that my
Yeah.
perception was different. Or maybe you're never going to, and that's okay
Yeah,
too.
that always happens to me
Like,
at the most random times. Like, oh, I'll pop in my
yes,
head, like, some
me
stupid
too.
shit
And
I
I
said
think,
10 years ago.
so
I'm
I
like,
think if
what
we
is
could loosen up a
Yeah,
little on, like, okay, if I've explained it to you and you don't get it right now, then there must be something wrong with you. And instead acknowledge, like, it's like planting seeds, like, we have all these different experiences. And so if I can just, like, hold space for the fact that our beliefs might be a little bit different, our perspectives might be different, and that that's okay, and share my perspective with
yeah,
you. I invite you to share yours with me, and then just hold that space, not just create a judgment right away. Be like, well, I gave it a try and that
yeah.
sucked, or, that was
I think
wrong, or
being
you're
open to
still wrong.
criticism or other people criticizing you is important because it also is like, how do you can't have you have better connections with people if they're able to tell you you were an asshole.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
they're
Well, and
able to tell you, and not just like, what about everything I did for you? Or like,
right.
hey, like, or even if somebody says, oh, you were racist when you said that, to go like, no, I have a black friend. I can't be racist. It's like, you could just
Yeah.
say, like,
Well,
okay,
maybe reflecting on it. Exactly. And
yeah,
I do a lot of journaling for that reason. And I'll look at, what is my brain repeating? What patterns are coming up? And it's often, this is the unpleasant part of shadow work. It's often, like, ugly. Sometimes there's ugly crying involved. It's not the prettiest part of me, but it allows me to then be compassionate, use the word confident, be like, I'm not afraid of something getting dug up, out of my, like, just something exploding out of my unconscious that and not that it never will, but I do a lot of, if I find myself exploding, then I do some work to say, like, where is that coming from, so that hopefully in the future I'm not exploding like that again,
Yeah. Well, and I think you don't usually get defensive about something unless it's true about on some level. Like if somebody says something to you and you immediately jump to the defense, it's like, well, maybe there's some truth to that, or maybe there's because like if somebody walked in here and it was like, you're a penguin, I'm not gonna be like, I'm not a penguin.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna be like, nope.
Unless you had a complex
Yeah.
about a little bit of penguinness, and
Yeah.
then you might, that's exactly the thing. And that's why it's a clue. It's like, okay, why did that upset me? Like, oh, it has to do with, a thing that my second grade teacher said that was not like, usually the point of that work, because I want to iterate that, like, you don't have to do that work. There's plenty of healing can be done without digging up every little detail, but it can be helpful to dig up those details only to like dissolve them and say, like, to reframe them from a different perspective, to be like, oh, that was second grade, or that person was probably having a bad day, or like, instead of just when we're not conscious of it, you're just carrying around this unconscious little like story that you're not bringing into light.
And I guess yeah, because I mean I did this through, I guess in a way I did do shadow work if I reflect on why I react, even if it wasn't like you said, there's not like a formal official way to do it. It's but because I was thinking like when I guess at least in the habit whenever I thought someone was even hinting they were talking to me like I didn't know what I was talking about, or like then I would kind of get like I would get my reaction would be to get angry, like and kind of like aggressive, like I would get on the defense about that. So then I analyzed that. I was like, okay, that goes back to like my childhood, um like when people thought there was a point like people thought I was like slow at time, or like there was something wrong with me, and they'd like I'd get bullied or called like uh retard or something like that. Like sometimes I was because I kind of stood out in some ways because like I developed a little slower in some ways. So I think that's why when somebody talks to me like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, like that, sometimes I'd get on that like angry defense. Then I realized that's where it comes from. And now that I realize that, I don't do it as much. Like it's kind of gone down. So I
Yeah, it
realized
like
something in me.
deflates, it diffuses the
Yeah.
emotional charge of things that are otherwise can be very controlling. Like before you did that work, you probably like blew up at people now and
Yeah.
then, or had reactions that maybe, you know, might have even destroyed relationship. I don't know. I'm just like,
Yeah.
often we do that kind of thing. And then once
Yeah.
you do the work, you can, maybe it doesn't go away completely. Maybe there's, sometimes eventually maybe it does, but it can at least allow you to navigate relationships without, like, might feel a feeling come in and then recognize it and be like, oh, that's my own little
Yeah. And
shadowy
especially if
aspect
it's
that
someone
I
you
get to
don't,
work with.
especially if it's someone you don't know that's like doing it, then that's just like, oh, that's just something with them. Like that's
Right.
their, it's not
Yeah.
me.
Instead
I
of
don't need to
taking it
take.
personally, you can realize,
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm having this emotional reaction that I'm carrying around because of my experience. It's not something that person has imposed on me or has done to me, which I think is a common, we often feel like the other person must have caused our feelings, but actually they all come from the inside. Much
Yeah.
to my dismay, I have learned. I
Yeah.
wanted to blame I
That's
wanted
it's
to blame
good.
my mother and everyone else, just like most people, but turns out
Yeah.
it's all me.
Yeah. Well, and that's what mindfulness and meditation helps with, is kind of just observing your thoughts. Then it helps you be less reactive. And
Yeah,
I guess
and
you
even
can
if it is
do
your
some kind of
mother's
work
fault,
just meditating too, and
yeah,
observing the path. Yeah.
yeah, and even if it is like, and I was using the mother's fault tongue in cheek, but even if someone really did do you wrong and was, really awful to you and caused you harm, it's not helpful at some point to carry that around and repeat that. So to reframe it, again, it doesn't mean reframing it like, oh, what they did is fine, but it means reframing it like, that doesn't mean I'm a bad person, or I deserved that, or that they even necessarily intended that, depending on the scenario. Like there's a lot of
Yeah, but that it's
nuances.
more, people's behaviors are usually more about them, and what they say is more about
Yeah,
them.
even
That's why
like
they
the
always tell
worst.
people like if somebody says something mean to you, it usually says more about them, and that's true. That kind of ties to the shadow work thing because like people.
Exactly. Somebody who's actually deliberately like being cruel for reals, like intentionally, is usually somebody who hasn't done that shadow work and has a
Yeah,
lot of pent up unconscious things that are just spilling out onto other people. And again, that doesn't have anything to do with the other people that it's spilling out onto. It has to do with their own internal unresolved conflicts.
Yeah, exactly. And a good book for observing your thought I wanted to bring up was Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach. You probably heard of it. That she says that much of our suffering comes from resisting and rejecting ourselves or our present experiences, and she argues that fully embracing ourselves, including our flaws, emotions, and life circumstances, with compassion and mindfulness, we can experience freedom, peace, and genuine self-acceptance. And so it's like about letting go of self-judgment, stopping the inner shoulds and musts, and allowing ourselves to be fully human without harsh criticism. And then she goes in like meditation practices and psychology and personal stories, and but that was a good book that like explored that concept.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I haven't actually read that one. I was getting into, I want to say, Isabel Gray, who has a whole slew of shadow work books on Amazon. I can't vouch for her credibility necessarily, but I noticed she wrote a lot of books on it, and I've been enjoying one of her audiobooks. And I would say that it seems to be like a fairly I mentioned earlier, like the set of tools is fairly universal and common that people come to, I think, in this kind
Yeah.
of work, whether it's shadow work or inner child work or integrated family work is another name for some similar type of work, which is really just all about it's all of that body of work is related to Carl Jung's work, which had to do with archetypes and our subconscious, how we perceive ourselves and others, and how that then influences our relationships and our lives.
Yeah, we don't see people as they are; we see them as we are.
Yeah, we see everyone through the lens, the filter of our own experience. And as I mentioned before, our brains are actually these guessing, they're always trying to guess based on past perception what's going to happen next or what is happening next. You're basically perceiving what you think is happening based on guesses more than there's a whole lot of guessing in our perception going on. And so, especially if you find yourself in a lot of dysfunctional, type of emotional relationships that aren't turning out the way you thought they were going, then that's what happened. Exactly what happened to me, where it became obvious I needed to look at how am I, when all these patterns keep happening and you're the common denominator, then it's time to look at what's going on in you that's causing that.
Yeah, and some people can't do that even no matter how many they. I was just thinking one person I know that they had this toxic behavior and was kept alienating person after person. It's like no matter what, it was never their fault. It was never.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in my 50s, and I even though I don't think I've ever thought like I didn't have a part in it, but I still didn't and still haven't completely figured it out, So like there was still, like I talked about the onion analogy, there's still, like in my 30s, I did a lot of work and I came to a lot of realization, and in my 40s, another layer of work and realization, and in my 50s, I mean, I certainly feel like I've expanded more and done, come further along, but it hasn't fixed all my relationships or, fixed my, like, made me free from judgment or envy or any of those feelings. Maybe I just haven't done enough work yet. It's possible.
Never possible to be fully free, and it's not always stuff you want to judge. I remember one meditation teacher, like I went to his groups of times. He said that looking at your thoughts and not judging your thoughts, and not stuff you necessarily want to change, but stuff you want to understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's such an important distinction that we should reiterate, is like a lot of times if you say, think about your thoughts or dig into your past experiences, if you're sort of new to this work, the temptation is to then you just end up ruminating on, and a lot of therapists actually sort of encourage this. Talk therapy is a lot of times just especially if you have PTSD or something, you just end up traumatizing yourself over and over again and ruminating in that pool that, that your body's creating chemistry in response to a thought pattern, and you're just having that feeling over and over. So I want to make sure and iterate that, to me, that's a really important distinction for people to try to practice and get their mind around if they're going to do shadow work. Is it's not about rumination and just reiterating the negative stories. And even if you're digging up, you might remember some past trauma. It's important to not just then, like, you might end up reliving some of that past trauma, but don't just stay there and relive it and think about it and write about it. It's about putting some distance between it. Like, try looking at it again like a bird in a windowsill, or with some distance from an outside perspective of the whole scenario. Like, look at, if someone was abusing you, consider where did they learn that behavior, and where
Like, how
in
do
the
you break
whole,
the cycle, kind of?
yeah, in the whole context of it, and not like what fault was yours, but how could you have participated differently so that you don't end up repeating that pattern. Because there's, even in the worst of abuses, I want to be careful here, because like, some of the very worst abuses happen to children who are too young to make rational decisions about how to navigate
Yeah.
that, and
Well,
very
then some
often,
people are abused in adulthood because of
yeah,
abuse.
very often
Yeah.
those are the traumas that then end up creating adults who don't have good skills, and who end up being those very, monstrous type of
Yeah.
people in other
Or end
people's
up in
lives.
abusive relationships.
Yeah, or exactly, re-victimizing themselves. And in
Yeah.
either case, I think it's not so that it's not to look at it and lay blame, or, or judgment, but to gain some understanding, and then to be able to hold yourself in a safer space. If you're like, for me, I have had a lot of trauma, so I've had to learn, and I'm still learning, that I have to take extra precautions to keep myself safe in certain scenarios or with certain types of people. And that's just, that realization comes from doing that kind of work on myself. And it's like a total personal responsibility thing. I can't put it on anyone else. Nobody else can do it for me. So for me, that's why I say shadow work has been very personal. And I think that's true for like, on the one hand, there's the societal piece. If we all did more personal shadow work, I feel like societally we could maybe do some work on this bigger, like,
Yeah.
societal
Well, I
shadow.
was just
But
thinking, like, how Hitler, he was just one guy, but then he latched onto something dark and repressed in everybody else that came out.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that was something I've said, like, if it wasn't Hitler, it would have been somebody else, because that aspect was brewing, and actually still is brewing in the human
Joker was
psyche,
kind of about the shadow in a way. The movie Joker. I don't know if you saw Joker.
Yeah, yeah, it's been a
Yeah,
while since
yeah,
I saw it, but yeah.
yeah. Because, like, he just kind of fell into a series of events. He was just one guy that had, issues. He had mental health issues, but he kind of just fell into a series of events, and then he became, like, the something that everybody latched onto. Like, he didn't just represent his own mad anger at the system. It was everybody else. Like, all these
Yeah.
other people followed
And I
him.
think you see that in
Yeah,
society so much. And we have, media, the movies, we have movie stars, villains, heroes, all of that
yeah,
plays into our, wanting to play with that aspect between our subconscious and our conscious. I know Freud
that's what I was
and
gonna say.
Jung, and
That's where there's a good side of the shadow, is how it helps with, like, creativity and art, and like, how would you write good? The best villains is the writer has to put himself in those, or herself, in the shoes of the villain, and be able to see things from their perspective. So it's like they wouldn't be able to write a good villain if there wasn't that part in their psyche, but they used it in a creative way. You know?
exactly. And the best villains are also sort of heroes. I
Yeah,
think we
they're
we
heroes in
tend
their
to.
own, from their perspective.
Yeah, we love, like,
Yeah,
the Joker sort of highlights, but we love to see the nuances of both. A good story shows the fallibility of the hero, and it shows the heroic nature of the villain. Yeah, I think that
yeah. It's better to have, like, villains that you can kind of see things from their perspective, not just like, like, just evil for being
yeah.
evil or whatever. Yeah,
I mean, in a Saturday morning cartoon, it's
yeah.
nice
But
to
it's just
just
like a
have a
fun thing,
villain
like,
that you can be
yeah,
against, and that is sort of the mentality that humanity seems to be in some level to me, but I think, I just think it can be a richer life, more meaningful and more fulfilling if you get a little deeper underneath, and then
Yeah.
take
Yeah, like why did
responsibility
the
for,
mustache twirling villain guy start going
yeah. I
like what
mean, if
happened
you're gonna
to
do
his
it
son?
though, do it good. That's what I say. Like,
Yeah,
do it, get the jacket and
yeah.
twirl the mustache
Yeah.
well.
Or like the classic thing where he puts the what does he put the woman in front of the train or the like
Yeah,
yeah, what caused
damsel
him to
in.
do that? What caused him to tie something in his childhood or maybe I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. There's a whole rabbit hole we could untangle there with
Yeah.
the damsel in distress tied to the train tracks. There is
Yeah.
a lot there to unpack.
Yeah. And I was just thinking like I think that's when you really repress like people who never speak up for themselves or are very like repressed and everything they because I was just thinking of someone I'm not gonna like go into details who it was like or throw him under the bus or anything, but it was someone I knew that I recently found out he had this whole other dark side to him that I didn't know about because people were telling me about stuff he did that I was like, wow, I couldn't picture him doing that. He was always kind of like timid and like this, but he did like some messed up things that he pushed a lot of people away. I'm like, wow, like that side of him was like always in there, like waiting to come out. Like he just was like, it just like blew my mind that he had that side of him, like the very aggressive side, a very like dark side of him that he like repressed.
Yeah.
And,
I
yeah,
mean, a lot of us have seen the show Dexter. I don't know if you have, but
but yeah,
that was
yeah,
popular. It's popular because there's something in that appeals to us, right? The shadow aspect that it gets corralled off and then like expands on its own somehow, like unguarded. To me, those are like cautionary tales, maybe
yeah. Or
that
like
sort
Walter
of
White,
tale.
Breaking Bad. Like he
Yeah,
started. Remember, he kind of always had that Heisenberg in him, the dark side, but like
yeah.
he never stood up for himself. He never
I
expressed,
would
and
say that
then
character kind of
yeah,
mostly
his
brought the
shadow took
shadow
over.
out in a way.
Yeah,
Like he didn't really hide, wasn't really suppressed so much as letting it run the show.
yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting character. Yeah.
And there's another good book I want to because I was listening to the audiobook while I was researching for this. It's on Spotify for those who want to listen. It's called Shadow Work: A Guide to Integrating Your Dark Side for Spiritual Awakening, and it has like different meditations and everything for
Is
like
that Isabel
integrating.
Gray?
Mary Silva. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah. I'll
Similar
have to
name,
check out
very
the one
similar
you mentioned.
title to Isabel Gray. So
Yeah,
that's why I asked it. Yeah, I'm listening to a very similar audiobook this week.
yeah. And you mentioned that what you do inner child work it has some similarities to um, shadow work, but there's some differences. I know we went a little bit into that, but maybe you could just say like
Yeah,
how they're different.
yeah. I did do a little bit of a deep dive just for my own understanding when you brought up shadow work because I wanted to get clear on the differences. And so there's integrated family work, which is just one, like it used to be called just parts work, I think. And that is, I think, like a broader, to relate it to Carl Jung's work, it would be looking at all those archetypal aspects of ourselves that are parts of ourselves and trying to create like a harmonious relationship between all those parts of ourselves. So that would be integrated family work. And inner child work is, in my mind, closer to shadow work in that it's often those repressed or suppressed or hidden, unconscious type of things, but it's a little more broad and a little closer to the total family systems work in that it's not just your unconscious or repressed things. It could be actual trauma, things that you remember and are conscious about your childhood that there's usually an aspect of like repression or suppression to that in my experience. So that's why I had to, look into what the distinctions are because they're very close. Shadow work being the examination of the unconscious. So the unconscious doesn't necessarily mean your inner child work. It could be, very much your adult things that have happened to you
And
in
it's
your
stuff that's less
adulthood, or even,
obvious, I guess, right? Because I guess
yeah, and
your
exactly,
child
by
work would be
definition, it's
more like obvious abuse, and shadow work would be more like validation you didn't get.
shadow work is by definition the things you're not conscious of. So, and then
Shadow work would be more like, I guess, maybe like validation you didn't get somewhere as a kid, but like something
yeah,
you
so
didn't be
often
like.
in
Yeah,
shadow work, you might end up doing inner child work in a way, because
yeah,
you end up
yeah.
digging up that some of the things that are unconsciously driving you have to do with childhood experiences. But again, the distinction is that not all inner child work is shadow work, and not all shadow work is inner child work, I guess would be a way to put it. But there is a lot of overlap because of the way that we tend to suppress childhood or repress childhood memories, and the way that those early years are so formidable, in how we then perceive the world. So a lot of times, if you're looking at, why do I have this unconscious belief, you might quickly get back to a childhood experience. So they're very much interconnected, but they're not the same thing, I guess would be fair to say.
And is there a common thing you notice with inner child work with different people you worked with?
Yeah, I marvel frequently at the commonalities of all these things, and how, I've written a couple self-help books now, and all self-help books say the same thing. I joke, but I'm not but it's true. It's funny because it's true. And, it's all through different lenses, and the same, all inner, unconscious or archetypal work, on some level is very similar and the same. Now, I say that partly tongue in cheek. Obviously, there's infinite variation at the same time. We all have differences, but for sure, sexuality is a huge theme. So many human beings have been felt shamed, or been, yeah, so many human beings have struggled with their own sense of identity, through the lens of their gender, their sexuality, or their attractions, or other people's attractions or lack of attractions to them. So that would probably be the number one basket that I see come up in both child work, inner child work, and in shadow work, both in myself and in helping other people. The idea of not being enough, not being worthy. Um, like almost everything boils down to that. Even the sexuality stuff often boils down to that. A lot of us, have tried to find a sense of self-worth through our sexuality. And so that like a lot of times those two go hand in hand. That sense of not being enough or not being worthy of love, is often entangled with our sense of sexuality, our sense of identity. And like there's other little branches from that, but I I often, like, I think you could really boil almost all of it down to, that sense of belonging, that sense of being connected, like being worthy your place in the world, feeling like you belong, feeling like, you have a right to be here and you're worthy. That's what most human beings are struggling with when you really get down underneath all the layers of the onion.
You know,
I think. I don't know. What do you think, Sean? Do you come to a different conclusion? You've talked to a number of people now about this kind of stuff.
yeah, I guess I guess that everybody wants to be loved on some way, or like valued, or on
Yeah.
some way, or
Yeah. Worthy, valued, enough. Like those words come up a lot, I think. Yeah. Valued is a word that's come up for me a
I
lot
think
lately.
people
And
want to be heard too. They want to
yeah,
be listened
seen. We want to be seen. We want to be heard. We want to be appreciated. We want to feel, like we have a voice, that's worth that has some value amidst our social circle and our own lives. We want to feel a sense of agency in our own lives, and not feel like we're just, you know, living out someone else's story. Those are all very, like, those come up in every
to. And
part of work
actually,
that I've done.
yeah, and I think there was a quote from Jung that said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." So
Exactly.
shadow work is about taking the wheel of your own psyche. So that's kind of, it kind of connects to being able to like shape your own life and shape your own reality. You kind of can connect to that in a way.
Yeah, exactly. It's about recognizing that you are the biggest thing in your own way, and the good news of that is that you can get out of your own way by learning about yourself and, being okay with getting out of your own way. It's that easy and that difficult.
Yeah. And I think it would be good, like people, because a lot of people don't hear out other perspectives or other, like, especially if it's someone who's very different from them, like, because I think more listening and more empathy would do a lot, like, especially not just people from like your own community or whatever, like your own. It's good to hear because a lot of people aren't open to hearing like different perspectives or where other people are coming from, or they'll get on the defense or they want to just say their perspective. But
Yeah,
I
I
think that
think,
listening will, if we listen to each other, that'll solve a lot. So
yeah, I agree. I think it's similar to recognizing when you have inner conflict and doing that shadow work. It's like a mirror to the outside, recognizing when you're feeling when you want to push someone away, same as if you want to push something in yourself away, there's an opportunity there to expand and to learn so much and to grow if you can just like not turn away and instead turn towards the thing in yourself or the thing in someone else with curiosity. Doesn't mean, not with judgment and like I'm going to persecute you, but with genuine curiosity of like, I wonder how you came to feel that way or think that way or be that way. And
yeah,
as you understand that, you start to see, yeah, we're all products of our environment and our experience, and most of us are pretty beautiful and fun and worth having around, on at least on some level. I
yeah,
like the saying of like, you don't go into the forest and look at the gnarly oak tree and think, oh, that tree shouldn't be there. You appreciate that it's been through a lot,
yeah,
and but the character of it. I think if we could appreciate that in each other more, we would have a better time of it.
yeah, yeah. Definitely. It's. I was just thinking, like, if you look at the Bible, like allegorically, it's kind of like once they had the knowledge of good and evil, it's like then the whole story of like humanity began. So like it wasn't a bad thing, like entirely that she ate from the tree, because then that kind of then that they had the knowledge of the good and the evil. It kind of made me think of that, and also the yin and the yang. It's you can't
Hmm.
have one without the other.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. The whole thing just keeps spinning around only by duality and conflict on some level, or to me, it's about that balance. So always like I like the seesaw analogy. So it's only fun if you're like aiming toward the middle and trying to balance that out. If you're just trying to win and outweigh the other person, the game is quickly over and it's not fun for anyone.
Yeah, and the shadow, and it's not something that needs to go away. It's good. It's part of what makes us whole, and then integrating and what makes us whole. So it's about being a whole and
Hmm.
fully conscious. Yeah,
Yeah, it's probably worth saying that I don't think, like, just like I don't think it's good to think about getting rid of death altogether, I don't think we should be thinking about getting rid of the shadow altogether.
no,
I think there's a good reason that we keep things unconscious. At the same time, it's important to be examining what we've put into our unconscious and making sure that we're not being ruled or run by, thoughts that we wouldn't want ruling us or running us. So that's why shadow work can be helpful.
and I also know like another thing talked about with shadow work is mirror work, like
Hmm.
young connected and self awareness and facing the shadow, like looking into the mirror and then helping recognize parts of yourself you may be repressing or denying. And the reflection could be like a metaphor for the internal reality, and whatever you notice externally often mirrors internal conflicts or patterns. So that's something I haven't explored, but apparently that's another way to do shadow work is mirror work.
Yeah, it's a very, like, I think that's sort of another way of saying the same thing. I mean, there are nuanced differences, but and you can physically like look in a mirror and and do some work that way. It can be very interesting. But also, um, the metaphorical mirror would be exactly what we've been talking about, in that what you see reflected back in other people's responses to you and in your own responses to other people.
Yeah, exactly. So is there anything? final thoughts or anything you want to say before we wrap up?
Oh, not that I can think of. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I appreciate you putting up with the tech difficulties we
But yeah,
had at
no
the start.
problem.
And yeah, it's nice to touch base with you over now. It's been a few years, and to see our you and I's evolution in our own personal journey.
Exactly.
So I appreciate you sharing that with me. And yeah, I finally finished my book, The Shift. You see behind me, that's out on
Oh, nice.
Amazon.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
will mention.
And
Um,
is there a place people should look that up or look up?
that is
Because you also
available
do
on
the coaching
Amazon,
stuff
and it's called The Shift: Own Your Emotions, Own Your Life. It's a little hard to find because I'm not a bestseller yet, so
on
Amazon will
Amazon, or
show you other things. But yeah, it is on Amazon, and it's not on audiobook yet, but I hope to have it on audiobook eventually. And yeah, I've been working on a little course that goes with that, which has been largely for my own benefit, but I do hope to share that with other people. And that's called the Human Reboot Protocol. And it's really about just practicing. Actually, I've set a lot of this stuff to some 2-minute tools to help. Really, the shift is about re-regulation because I was really grappling with dysregulation. So it's a like a tangential piece to the shadow work. Would be a precursor to being able to do the shadow work is being able to learn how to manage your own emotions and not just fall off the deep end and not just suppress them to where you don't have any feelings, but to be able to feel feelings, not let them rule your life, and then dive into things like shadow work and improving your relationships and all those other things that I think without that piece is why I wrote the book. Without that piece of learning to recognize when you're dysregulated and bringing yourself back into a regulated state, then a lot of this work just gets overwhelming, or you just end up drinking or doing something to keep yourself from the intensity of emotion. That's what I did for about 50 years, so
but yeah,
maybe
that was
40
another
years.
thing I forgot to mention is how like yeah, like where that's where substance abuse and everything could be kind of escape the parts of yourself, or um and like what is
Yeah,
that reason, like that there could be sometimes you could have a self-destructive side of yourself, like what why is that, like rather than judging that, like why do you feel the need to sometimes, or like
I
where
found
is, you know.
yeah, I think it's fascinating that because I've done a lot of substance abuse and hung out with a lot of people doing all sorts of substances. And I think there's a very interesting thing that's happening in a lot of that, like party mode, where people are really trying to get in touch with that shadow aspect. They're really wanting to dance more with that shadow aspect. Some people can't be honest with themselves unless they're drunk. You probably heard that. Like there's a aspect of humanity that only allows themselves to look at that shadow aspect when they're inebriated, which is unfortunate because in my experience, you can't really do the work very well when you're really inebriated. So it's
Especially if
harder.
you're doing a job where you have to put on a face, and
Well, and
then
then it's toxic and it will ruin your life in all sorts of ways. So there's that too. But
no, but I'm saying like if there's a job where you have to put on a face like day after day, like when you finally get a
yeah,
chance, like on the weekend or whatever, to like let loose, it's just like
absolutely.
okay,
And I
fuck
think
it.
that's important too. I think actually that
Yeah,
humans should probably
yeah. It's
should
not. I'm not
probably
saying it's necessarily bad, but it's like I'm saying like that's the shadow. That's getting what he meant, like getting in touch with the shadow. Like so, I think sometimes there's a human need to just be like, fuck it, I don't care. Like let's
yeah,
just
I
go
think
wild, man.
absolutely some of the time. I mean, that's why we have like Halloween and New Year's Eve and some things,
Yeah,
some regular routines like that where we're allowed to and we celebrate just getting in touch with that shadow self a little bit more. I think it's also healthy to do it. If you're like me and you have a lot of trauma and a lot of like it's if you find that it's been ruling your life in ways that aren't your favorite, aren't pleasant, then doing shadow work can really be helpful to loosen its hold on your behavior.
and I think you grew up with like punk and metal too. You said right, or
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, like that whole thing is just like that's. But I mean, to me, it's a cool way of like expressing the shadow. But I think that's kind of like what it's going towards too, like that, like that.
Yeah, I think artwork and music is such a great way to explore the shadow, and often things will come out. I mean, that's the whole, again, the definition of shadow is unconscious. So even if you think you're diving into it and you're bringing it into the light and you're getting conscious, there's for sure a lot more under there that's going to be unconscious that there might not be words for. There might, like some of it's just feeling, sensation, like, I don't even know what, because I don't have words. So that's why I use music and art, things that can express some of that that's beyond words.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on. I think it's been a good chat. And what about your coach? Is anything else you want to plug? Or?
No, not right now. Look me up on the school platform if you're interested in my human reboot protocol or my art secrets group. I'm hosting some art dates every Saturday lately, doing some creativity flow segments, trying to really just get human beings in touch with those aspects of ourselves and also feeling better about them. Like I'm big on self-love and acceptance and celebrating our unique aspects. So if you want to connect with me, I would love to connect with you.
Cool. And I'll put the links in the, you'll let me know what links you
Yeah, I'll
want.
send you some links.
Yeah.
I'm pretty easy to find these days. I'm everywhere. So.
Well, that's about it for this episode of Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff. If any of you have any experiences with shadow work or like what's been your experience like exploring that, or just any thoughts on this episode, feel free to reach out on Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff. I'm on Instagram, and you can follow the future episodes on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, I have an easier to remember Instagram handle now. I changed it to Sean K Vibes. So it's SEANK Vibes. If you want to reach out to me there, that not only has my podcast, but also everything else I'm doing too. And that's about it for this episode. We'll catch you on the next one.
Excellent. Thank you.